there is a fifth dimension, beyond that which is known to man. It is a dimension as vast as space and as timeless as infinity. It is the middle ground between light and shadow, between science and superstition, and it lies between the pit of man's fears and the summit of his knowledge. This is the dimension of imagination. It is an area which we call the Twilight Zone.
No, you're not really in the Twilight Zone. That was a fantasy TV show beginning in 1959. You could tell, couldn't you? It was a place of time and space described in the video, but a place where people went in, and when they came out, they were usually changed. With liminality, though, we are talking about a human reality, that mysterious place of time and space, which is between. Last week, we celebrated our youth for leaving high school. That's a neat time in a way, isn't it? They were ready to go to college or get a job, but they were no longer able to be with their friends and experience their youth. Now they were shifting into being ready to take on responsibilities of adulthood with all the scare that that brings with it. That's liminality. Some here have lost their jobs and are finding their way in the workforce again, all over again. That's liminality. Others are on that space between losing someone they've loved who died, someone intimate, and having to rebuild their life now. Their own identity is now changed, and they have to create their own new sense of who am I without the one who helped shape who I am. That's liminality. Liminality is also a place between the subliminal pre-consciousness and our emerging consciousness. Hang on to that a while. And one could argue that liminality is really life, because we are always somewhere between yesterday and tomorrow. So, right, it could be that. And that makes perfect sense. And yet sometimes there are those dramatic events which shake the foundation of our lives, and everything radically changed. And even if we're not fully aware of it, which sometimes we're not, it has. Because sometimes those things happened and we weren't really paying attention. These experiences are moved beyond normal liminality into what is called a liminal phase. Now, the word liminality, I've got to admit, is not in the Bible, so why are we preaching on this thing, for Pete's sake? But then again, I tend to be a biblicist, what can I say? But I looked hard, it's not there. However, I found a whole bunch of examples. I mean, think, for example, of the Jews emerging from slavery, from the bondage in Egypt. And for 40 years, they were in a liminal phase until they got settled into the promised land. The destruction of Jerusalem led to at least 3 decades of liminal phase for both Christians and Jews. As a matter of fact, the New Testament is itself a product of this liminal phase. Experiencing a liminal phase of life is necessary. It's a critical element of human growth and development. As such, it's vital to know where we are, what's happening, to know what we need to do in order to make healthy decisions about where we will go next as individuals and as an organization. May I be so bold as to propose 3 key actions. Action number 1 is to recognize the signs and causes of our being between. Mostly external sources have thrust us into this state of liminality with multiple triggers which have yet to be fully identified, named, owned, and assessed. Assessed? Yeah. What has been the damage done? What are the opportunities that have been revealed? What are the unintended consequences of decisions we made along the way? What grieving needs to be done? What dreaming needs to be imagined? What relationships need to be repaired? Action 2 is to understand what we can, whatever we can, learn from our reactions, the reactions to those triggering events which put us here. Our reactions, fears, feelings of loss, disappointments, frustration, anxiety, even denial, along with new hope and anticipation, those unintended reactions could easily derail good decision-making, making us want to escape the uncertainty of our liminal situation. This is not something we want to rush into. We do want to take our time to be fully mindful of our situation and our mental and emotional reactions. It's important for us to embrace the ambiguities that we face. To be aware is to be in better space to make healthy decisions for our future. Action 3. This has to do with redefining or refining our sense of identity. Who are we now? We can no longer be who we were or who we thought we were about to become. That train has left the station on that one. What about who we were or who we thought we were about to become is really important. So important we want to find some creative way to make it still be part of who we become. That requires some thought and some conversation. Who we are now in this stage of vulnerability and anxious uncertainty, and who do we want to become? We need some conversation with each other. Now, with that said, I'd rather talk right now about Jesus. And as I do, I'd like you to keep your mind on these three key concepts that are up here above us. And think about liminality with regard to recognizing, understanding, and refining and redefining. See if Jesus shows the way. From my reading of the Gospel of Mark, I get the impression that Jesus went through periods of liminality. Now, I'm not saying that Mark had this in mind. So don't think I'm clearly seeing this, but Mark may not have. That's okay. Sometimes that's just how you read the Bible. This is how I've come to understand one aspect of Mark's story about Jesus. Now, the three phases of liminality strike me at the moment. One is between the time Jesus' father died and when he moved to Capernaum. There's got to be something, there's got to be a story in that. Mark didn't tell it to us. We have no clue. But it's got to have been one of those times of liminality, of a personal crisis. And the second one is between baptism by John and all the things that happened after that, right up until the period where John died and Jesus began his ministry. That has got to have been a significant liminal time of trying to find out, soul searching and looking forward. And the third one, hold on to your hats, is a reaction time from when a Gentile village gave him a negative reaction and at the end of it was his mountaintop transfiguration. That is the most obscure of all the three, right? I mean, you were with me up until then. You said, okay, he's definitely lost it. I understand. Mark gives us the most information, though, about this liminal phrase. The others are just, you kind of think that must be one. This one, I think he lays it out for us. And I'd like to unfold that, but I will need you to help me because I'm plowing through this stuff. Mark's story of this liminal phase began with the healing of a profoundly wounded man. Was it a form of PTSD? I kind of think so. You heard me tell the story. I won't go over it again. But having been half-naked man out of his mind, when the local villagers arrived, they found him fully clothed in his right mind. Shock and awe. Didn't think you'd hear that from the pulpit, did you? Then they saw that in the process of healing, their livestock of swine had been destroyed, and their response was to beg Jesus to go away. I see this as a triggering event that appears to have shaken Jesus and launched him into his liminal phase. It isn't evident in the story. It's evident by what does not happen immediately after. He does not go back into Gentile territory. Rejected by the Gentile villagers, he returns back to familiar Jewish communities by the lake and in teaching and healing there. After a short spell, he heads for his hometown in Nazareth. You see it there on the map. Was this a retreat to his shattered past? Was this a journey into his childhood to help him make sense of his new reality? Mark doesn't tell us his motivation. Mark is very close to his chest in talking about anybody's motivation, especially Jesus. We don't really know. But what must Jesus have felt when he was rejected by even his own townspeople? It's one thing for the Gentile, but his hometown folk. He wandered around local villages, and at that point he sent out his apprentices to go on mission fields. So they went out and did their mission, and when they returned, Jesus began preaching and teaching again, and he fed 5,000 people during one of his preaching missions. And these were basically in Jewish territory. We can assume they were all Jews. From that, then he decided to head to Bethsaida, a predominantly Jewish community, not exclusively, predominantly. But on the way across the lake, you remember what happened. The storm came up. And yep, you remember that too. That's the time when Jesus calmed the troubled waters. And they landed not at Bethsaida. Remember the storm? They landed over at Gennesaret. Now, after several encounters with challenges in this new location Jesus was in, Jesus and company took off away from Galilee up towards Tyre, or Tyre. Which is it? I don't know. Someone probably does. Tell me. I see other people as confused as I am. We'll pretend it's whatever I said. He went there to retreat, so the scripture says, seemingly to get away, to rest and think things through. It appears he just needed a break. He was hoping no one would see him. He was not there for ministry. He was taking a break on his Sabbath rest. The story is found in the end of Mark 7, somewhere around verse 24, that we read about a woman from Syria, originally from Syria, a Phoenician. In this encounter, we learned that Jesus said what we've already observed, that he had adjusted his ministry to be one of Jews first. I've often thought whether he had a red cap when he did that. I don't know, probably not. He actually told this woman that was his charge, Jews first, but he did it in this crude metaphor about dogs. I don't want to go into that one right now. But somewhere in that conversation with this remarkable, clever woman, she set in motion something vital for Jesus in that liminal space. that made a huge difference in his behavior. We see it recorded as you read through Mark. Because from there, Jesus returned to acts of healing and teaching among the Gentiles. He went away from Galilee, further north, up into the area of Sidon. And then he went a little bit east of that, and then he went back down south towards the Lake of Galilee. He had another big meal, this time 4,000, and this time it was in a place where there was likely a mixture of Gentiles and Jews. Whoa! And that story, by the way, is in chapter 8. After he took his apprentices to another retreat near Caesarea Philippi. Now, you've heard that story so many times. You know that story. This account is found in Mark 8, beginning at verse 27. Jesus began to ask his apprentices, "Who or what do folks say I am?" And then, "Who or what do you say I am?" At this point, Jesus may be voicing his basic liminal question. Who or what am I to be? Who or what am I to be for? At this point, Jesus had a sharp disagreement with Simon, nicknamed Petros, English Rocky. Through that, Jesus' trajectory became clearer, as symbolized by his mountaintop experience of transfiguration, found in Mark chapter 9, the first 8 verses. From then on, Jesus began his way to Jerusalem. His identity clear, his direction unwavering, his ministry method, and his destiny determined. Okay, that's my Jesus story. Did you catch all the connections? I hope so. About what I see in his third liminal phase as I read Mark's presentation. This liminal phase had the kind of complexity I think will speak to our situation. I hope you see some of that. So my hypothesis is, and with some imaginative possibilities, I'll admit right up front, is that the rejection of the Gentiles shook Jesus' hope to reach the Gentiles. And that tossed him into this liminal phase. And his first reaction was, okay, I'll deal with my own spiritual kin first. If they don't want me, okay. His hometown folk then rejected him. Another trigger. At Gennesaret, Jesus was misunderstood by the people he talked to, and he had a lot of confrontations at that point, a lot of rejection. A third trigger. But Jesus' liminal trajectory was to receive an adjustment as he was confronted by a woman, this brilliant Gentile. Then he did a long walkabout deep into Gentile territory where he recognized the implications of his decision. Along the way, he experimented with new thoughts, new possibilities, new reactions began to emerge, and then he sought his community input and validation. That validation was confirmed on the Mount of Transfiguration, a symbol perhaps of his redefined or refined sense of identity. Jesus' mission objective, though, was undeterred through it all by his liminal phase. And his self-understanding appears to have been enhanced. His mission methods were redefined and refined. From that point on, the Jesus of Mark had clarity to his identity and purpose. He moved forward with determination and to deadly consequences, but a spectacular outcome. So liminality is not just all navel-gazing. It requires action, thought, conversation, response to ministry calls along the way. So what, you say, right? I don't blame you. What does this have to do with you and me and us? 2 weeks ago, Pastor Naomi mentioned that we were taking a break to catch our breath after the cascading events which brought so abruptly and had an impact upon our lives, our actions, and our sense of direction and identity. We are the same people. We are shaken by unintended and unexpected consequences from the COVID pandemic, pastoral transitions, broken building campaign, cultural disruptions of politics, rising gender and racial sensitivities, economic shifts, mass shootings, rising nationalism with its intolerances and wars. You get the drift, right? We want to raise our awareness as we process our reactions to what's happening around us and to us. We want to bring our underlying feelings and thoughts into collective and individual consciousness. Sounds like conversations again. We want to be more mindfully aware of what our five senses are telling us. Perhaps we have to need to grieve with each other. Perhaps we all need to come to recognize our new realities and redefine our collective and personal identities, to experiment with new ways of expressing our mission in the unfolding age that we see before us, and then to intentionally emerge boldly, going forward with unity of purpose and identity. Change can be scary. Brethren, don't take to it too kindly. But it is essential for our faithful following and human growth. We are people who know the living Jesus. We know his promise to be with us always, to the end of the age. Things around us are changing, but this is not the end. We are a resilient people because we are attached to the Anointed One who has touched our lives. You know that. You have known that. Jesus often said, as he did on the stormy lake, "Don't be afraid, it's me. Don't be anxious, it's me. I'm here." It is a choice that we face into this liminal phase with all its ambiguities. But we are grounded in the mission for our call to love with kindness and to live and work for justice and to walk humbly with our God, to be a people, or striving to be a people of peace and service and openness to all. As we purpose the path that life circumstances have handed us, it's time again not to give up, but to surrender into the loving arms of God. As we search out and determine just how our call is to take shape. Now, there's